Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by Become a Super Learner, the Masterclass. You guys, if you have ever wanted to learn things faster, to read faster and waste less time reading boring textbooks, if you've ever wanted to have near perfect memory for names, numbers, anything you want to learn, and expand your mind and retain information in a way that you never thought possible, well, then the Become a Super Learner Masterclass is exactly what you've been looking for. It's a 10-week program developed by myself and my mentors alongside some of the world's best memory experts and world record holding memory champions. It'll take you from zero to super learning hero in just a matter of 10 weeks in about 30 minutes a day or less. Now, you can go ahead and sign up for a free trial with no credit card required. All you have to do is go to jle.vi/learn. And if you choose to pick up the full course, you will also get an incredible discount for listeners of this podcast only. So please make sure to check it out and support the show. And on to today's episode. This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You guys, one of the only things that every nutritional expert that we've had on the show seems to actually agree on is that we all need to eat more vegetables, eat more greens, eat organic, cut out all the processed junk. Well, who has the time, right? Who has the time to go out, do the shopping, make the salads, make the juices, make the smoothies? And that's what I love so much about Organifi. Their product is an all organic green juice. It has all of the nutrients that you need. It tastes absolutely amazing, and it's made by wonderful people who I consider to be personal friends. And as listeners of this show, you guys can actually save 20% on your first order. And all you have to do is go to Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use the coupon code SuperHuman at checkout. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode. You guys, before we get started, I want to read you this review from Eric Bison from the US of A, who says, "Great show, highly recommended, 5 stars. Jonathan and his guests share inspiring and actionable lessons on how to achieve all of your goals in life, physically, emotionally, and financially. Highly recommended listening if you want to level up, conquer fears, become the best version of yourself, and live your ideal life." Wow. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the review. And for everyone else out there, well, I have a proposition for you guys. See, I'm actually thinking about putting the show on hold at episode number 150. That's 10 episodes away from now. Now, I know some of you guys might be upset about that. Some of you guys might say, no problem. You might want to follow us over to YouTube, jle.vi/YouTube, where I'm going to be publishing more content. But if you don't want to see this show be put on hold at 150 episodes, leave a review and let me know. Tell me that you guys want more episodes and share with me what kind of episodes you'd want to hear. What topics do you guys want to cover? I'm feeling like we've covered a lot of stuff, but I'm sure there are things out there that we can cover that would add value and help you guys overcome the impossible. So let me know and I will do an episode and keep doing episodes. Now on to today's episode. Today we are going to talk about creativity, guys. And to do that, we are inviting someone on the show who really has helped thousands and thousands of people become more creative in a way that might surprise you. His name is Grant Faulkner, and he is the executive director of National Novel Writing Month, and he's the co-founder of 100-Word Story. Now, you've seen his stories in Tin House, Southwest Review, Green Mountains Review, all kinds of different places, and you've seen his essays in the New York Times, Poets and Writers Digest, and The Writer. Now, Grant recently published a collection of 100-word stories, Fissures, and what he does is help people become more creative. He's written a book called Pep Talks for Writers, and he has a new book coming out in October. Now, I wanted to have Grant on the show because he has helped so many people do something that maybe they didn't think they could do, which is be creative and write. But in the course of the conversation, we go a lot deeper and we talk about why writing and creativity are such superhuman skills, why they will change the way you think, change the way you live, and help you accomplish your goals. So it's a great episode. I think you guys are going to find it very interesting. Grant and I have a lot of in common things, as you will see. And so without any further ado, allow me to present to you my new super friend, Mr. Grant Faulkner. Mr. Grant Faulkner, welcome to the show, my friend, and thank you for making the time. I know you're a little under the weather, so I appreciate you soldiering on.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. You know, creativity, I have to say, is one of those things that people ask me about a lot, and not because I'm known for creativity, but because successfully implementing memory techniques and mnemonic techniques a lot of times requires creativity to come up with all kinds of visualizations and to creatively use memory palaces and apply the techniques. And it's always something that I want to tell people, you can do this and stop saying you're not creative. And I hope today, my goal for the episode is to really give people a framework and an understanding as to how they can improve their creativity.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that really disturbs me is how often I hear people say they're not a creative type. I tell them, you're a creative type because you're a human. You know, every single human being is a creator. So my purpose in life is to activate that.
I love that. So let's start on that point a little bit, because I don't understand a whole lot about the neuroscience or psychology of creativity. One thing that I do know, and something that we teach in our courses, is that we're all born highly creative. I think everyone knows and acknowledges that. We all become less creative as we get into the one field of expertise. But what I've heard is that creativity is actually very, very fast to learn, that in a matter of days or weeks doing kind of simple exercises, you can become more creative. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's part of the premise of National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, as it's popularly known. And also the focus of the book that I'm coming out with in October 3rd, Pep Talks for Writers, 52 Insights and Actions to Boost Your Creative Mojo. And the reason NaNoWriMo, I'll just give this as an example. I feel like it has a superhuman formula. And our premise is that everyone has a story to tell, and that everyone's story matters. So fundamentally, we welcome people in, and our premise is to empower them to tell their story. And the way we do that is the month of November, 30 days. A goal and a deadline serve as a creative midwife. So the goal is to write 50,000 words in 30 days, or 1,667 words a day. So it's challenging, but it's doable. And the reason it's doable is that we guide people to banish their internal editor, meaning any internal voice or external voice that's the naysaying voice, and to just jump in and write with abandon. We have the premise that you're a writer because you write. You're not a writer because you're published or you're getting awards. You're a writer in the act of writing. And then we put in a system of accountability. We have a lot of tracking tools on our website. So people need to update their word count every day to see where they are on the trajectory of meeting 50,000 words in a month. And we provide rewards for incremental achievements. We have a badge system on the site for hitting certain milestones. And we also encourage people to give themselves rewards for those big achievements and to think about what's meaningful to them. And then I think one crucial part of what we are, we're not just an event, we're a wildly encouraging community. And that happens online on our forums. We get about 1 million forums posts on every topic under the sun related to writing and creativity. And also in person, we have 1,000 volunteers around the world who organize writing gatherings called write-ins, and people write together. And we also have 1,000 libraries across the United States. Same thing, librarians organizing writing gatherings. And there's a huge power in doing something with other people. And writing is also often characterized as a solitary act, and it obviously is in many ways. But we break down that mythology because we feel that when you write with others, your creativity is enhanced. So it's kind of a big package of superhuman powers that we provide.
I love it. So let me backpedal a little bit, Grant, because I want to kind of make a really important point. And I think that you have a probably really genius way of making it, which is, I think a lot of people, especially we were talking before the episode, a lot of people think that they're not creative. And I think part of that is a lot of people don't see creativity as an important part of their lives. They think, well, I'm a doctor. I need to play things by the book. I don't need creativity. And I think there's a misunderstanding of what creativity means. So I want to ask you, first off, what does creativity mean to someone like yourself who's made a career out of it? But also, why is creativity important for everybody?
Yeah, that's a really good point, I think. As you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, people start out as creators, right? You go to a preschool and you see kids just jump into finger painting, no matter what type of kid they are. But as we get older and the practical concerns of our lives or our own self-definitions, they kind of intrude on that creativity and limit it. I think what creativity is many things, but one thing it's attentiveness to yourself and your surroundings. And I think just in the case of stories, I think stories are often, minimized as this, entertainment. But our stories and our creativity shape everything we do. If you're writing, you're reimagining your world, no matter if it's a sci-fi novel or literary fiction or romance. Stories help us see through other people's eyes and build tolerance and empathy. And stories help connect us to other people. So just to use the example that you gave, the doctor, he could use all these things, right? If he's a writer. And that's one part of NaNoWriMo is that we're not necessarily guiding people to publishing. We're guiding people to creativity and to make it a priority for 1 month. And once you experience the power of making it a priority for 1 month, we hope that you carry that into the next 11 months. So yeah, I think like writing, whatever the creative practice is that calls you, I think by making it a priority for a month, you'll realize what powers it gives you just by doing it.
Right. And I think it's important for people to realize that creativity is so much more than just creating. I think in some sense, I don't know Dexter's actual definition, but I think creativity is a little bit misnamed because people think of it as creating something new, generating art, writing stories. But really, creativity is kind of divergent thinking, and it can be problem solving. It can be creative ways to express yourself. I always try to use creativity when I'm talking to people and describe things in different creative ways. Creativity can be ways to look at various interpersonal situations you have and think of new and maybe innovative ways to tackle different kind of uncomfortable situations. So I definitely agree with you that once you start improving your creativity and changing the way that you actually think and approach life's challenges, I think you realize many, many benefits that maybe we don't classically define as creativity.
Yeah, I like your word, divergent thinking. When you're creative, you really are bringing in all these wild juxtapositions of things in your mind. And you are creating something new in the sense that you're recombining things. And that's why I mentioned it. Attentiveness. You're attentive to your internal thoughts. You're attentive to the world. You're attentive to other people. And by being really attentive and attuned, you're going to create new thoughts kind of effortlessly, I think. One part of creativity is the deliberate sitting down every day and doing it. But one part of creativity is that attentiveness. And that's when it flows through your entire life.
Definitely. So I want to get into, obviously you guys do a very specific process, which is helping people write. But I want to get into not only that, but the broader range. Clearly you're a firm believer that people can improve their creativity. So I want to ask, how can people actually do it? What does it take to become a more creative person?
Well, a lot of things, but I think one thing is kind of what we're talking about here is the declaration to yourself of claiming that you're a creator and putting yourself, I don't know if it's putting yourself up on that pedestal, but I think too many people, I know writers who've written for decades and they are hesitant to call themselves a writer because they haven't published enough. So if you claim yourself as a writer, it will empower you to believe that you can sit down and write a novel, so you'll sit down and make it a priority and do it not just for a month, but for a year or two. And I think just by being creative, part of NaNoWriMo and writing a novel in a month, it's a creative experiment to start with. And being a creator is constantly examining your creative process. And so when you're a creator every day, you're constantly thinking about where you're falling short, what's working, and you're building a system that works for yourself. Every writer, every creator is different. But the only way to really get there, I think, it's great to read the how-to books. It's great to take classes. It's great to participate in community. All those things are wonderful. But at the end, you have to sit down and do it, and really do it in a deliberate way. I think they call it deliberate practice, so that you're not just writing, but thinking about what you're writing and how to improve it.
I like that. So it is really just a matter of practicing. And I guess I would add one of the things we teach in our courses is just one example, this multiple uses test, right? Where you take an object and you just try and generate a bunch of new uses. And I think, that test is great because it is just a simple tool that I can give someone. I can hand them a pen and say, give me 20 ways you could use this pen. And pretty quickly they start to think of, well, it could be a jousting rod for a mouse. And they start to get with really creative ideas. But more important than that, I think it's exactly illustrating what you're saying, where when you just sit down and you do the work of trying to think in new and interesting ways. For example, if you have to generate writing every day, you're going to start realizing that you have to start breaking boundaries and you start having to think in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And, one way we do that is, there's this popular concept of writer's block. And I happen to believe that writer's block doesn't truly exist. And one way we do that is kind of like your pen exercise. We call them word sprints. And so it's like you sit down and for 5 minutes, you write as much as you can. And you might get a prompt from one of our volunteers or on Twitter, or give yourself a prompt. But the thing is to just completely open yourself and write anything. And when you write anything, one sentence breeds another sentence, which breeds another sentence. And I think it's in that kind of improvisational space that sometimes the best ideas occur.
I like that. I like that a lot. I have another kind of tough question. I'm giving you a lot of tough questions that,
yes, bring them on.
Just come on. I have a friend, Dr. Anthony Metivier, who told me something a long, long time ago, and I immediately disagreed. And over the years, I've started to agree more and more. He told me that all wealth comes from writing. I want to hear your thoughts on that, because you've shared the gift of writing with so many thousands of people. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, just kind of off the top of your head.
Yeah, well, I have some assumptions about what he means by wealth, but what did he mean by wealth, just so I know?
That's actually a really great starting point for the question. I assume he meant monetary wealth. I think, wealth in terms of happiness and joy also could be, but I think in the context of this conversation, we were talking about monetary wealth. Okay.
I was going to go the other way and talk about spiritual wealth, but let's talk about monetary wealth. I think he's right on both occasions, even though so many writers are poor. But to his point, I guess I would say, and not knowing the context of the whole conversation, of course, but I mean, writing every day, it's a matter of introspection, right? It's a matter of looking out into the world and thinking about ways you can reimagine it. It's the single best tool for critical thinking that I can imagine. I'd love for somebody to give me a better tool for critical thinking. I mean, writing is thinking. Language is the main tool of thinking. And I think, just what we were touching on earlier too, is that, so much about building wealth, people think of it as just these days as more of like a kind of pure data-driven thing, or that you're finding this wonderful startup to invest in and you get lucky. But wealth and leadership and management and so many aspects of life are about empathy and working with people and collaboration. And so again, not that writing is the tool for that, but the arts in general are really wonderful ways to build those skills. So I think there are very practical, real world skills that come from writing and creativity that can lead to wealth.
I like that a lot. And that definitely echoes. I was listening recently to a very old episode of the I Love Marketing podcast, and they were asking, what's one of the best things that people can do out there to improve their money-making capacity? And what Tim said was just start writing, because writing teaches you to structure your thoughts and arguments. It teaches you to think in ways that are going to communicate things to people. And whether that's for marketing or that's for, meeting the pretty girl at the bar, learning to communicate better is one of the most powerful skills. And I think another thing that's interesting is, I'm reading right now a book by Yuval Noah Harari, Homo Deus. So it's the sequel to his book Sapiens. And it turns out that writing, the systems of writing down information on paper, happened along about the same time as we started money. So writing was a system for tracking money and accounting. And so if you want to take the broader sense, writing books will create wealth, and writing contracts will create wealth, and writing stock, deals and IPOs will create wealth, but also accounting is writing. And so these two things of communicating your thoughts and ideas on paper and money, transactions, commerce, literally were created at the same time by the Sumerians. And I think that's just an interesting aside, really big tangent, if you will, on just the importance of writing, and that everyone out there should learn to write and communicate thoughts and ideas.
Absolutely. And, we are living in the golden age of writing right now just because of the internet. So everyone is producing more words than they have ever produced, and with purposes. writing a tweet, it's only 140 characters. So in some ways it's technically easy, but in many ways it's super challenging, because to be entertaining or persuasive or just communicating your basic thoughts in an effective manner, you have to have writing skills to do that. And so I think social media is one big sort of rough draft in motion, I guess, where people are learning to write by doing it.
I think that's really interesting. I think there have actually been quite a few books, that have come out of blog posts or come out of discussions on forums, and, a lot of actually really interesting things that have come out of just internet discussions, like the Clue Train Manifesto, which was a very early document kind of dictating or predicting, I should say, how businesses would behave on the internet. And it came out of just a bunch of people talking on forums. I mean, Bitcoin came out of a bunch of people sharing ideas and writing white papers and writing different kinds of ways that they thought cryptography should be used on message boards. And, and that's now a $90 billion industry.
Yeah. And think about it just in a normal company. Think about how many projects either succeed or fail because of writing. The main way that people communicate these days is not really in meetings together, it's online. And so if you miscommunicate something in an email or burn a relationship because you flame somebody, writing can bring things down as much as they can rise things up.
I think that's a really, really great point. So at this point, Grant, I'm realizing we have our audience chomping at the bit and ready to commit themselves, I hope, to doing a little bit of writing. You and I certainly can share and have shared our experience that writing and learning how to write has been one of the most important skills in my life. And I had a lot of great teachers that gave me a lot of homework throughout middle school, grade school, high school, college that taught me how to write. But I think not everyone is so fortunate. And for that reason, I would love if you could share some homework with our audience that they can maybe do this week to start seeing some of these benefits and maybe open up their eyes to the fact that they can and should begin writing and begin creating.
Yeah, let me think about this. I think just to go back to what I was saying earlier, that one wonderful thing about creativity and writing is being attentive to the world and paying attention to the world. And so I think one thing would be really interesting for people to set themselves a goal of 1 week and to simply write down one observation per day. So it can be really anything. You could write a poetic sentence about the clouds. You could write a description of interesting person you saw in a cafe. You could even write an internal observation of one of your moods. But I think like that practice of writing one thing every day about an observation, it trains you. You'll have more than one observation a day. It'll start to turn into 5 or 10 or 20. So you'll approach every day a little bit more thoughtfully. And then just to build on that a little bit, I'm very fascinated. I'm a lifetime journaler. I've been keeping a journal since I was about 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
But it's taken many different forms and purposes, and that's what really intrigues me. And the author, David Sedaris, he is a way more obsessive and fanatic journaler than I am. And he just came out with a book that includes excerpts of his journals over the years. And he builds all of his books through his journals. So he'll wake up every morning and write down all of his reflections from the previous day. And oftentimes those lead into essays and books. I think it'd be a good week-long project, and maybe more if people like it, is write one journal entry per day and practice in the journal entry going beyond just observations and to really go deeply into yourself. Think about if you can write something that you're actually embarrassed by or would be embarrassed to show someone else or even recognize yourself. Because one of the benefits of writing and all creativity is exploring your own vulnerabilities. And the books that make the biggest mark in the world are really those when the author has really made himself or herself vulnerable. So really go deep for a week and just see how it changes you.
I really like that. I think that's a really great experiment. And I can definitely, like I said, communicate to people that my way of thinking and my way of seeing the world and my way of even treating other people has really changed as I've started to consider myself as a writer. And it took actually a long time, because for a while it was, well, no, I make online courses. I didn't make that declarative statement, and then, well, I write podcasts. It doesn't matter that I write the questions in advance and I kind of know where I want to take the conversation. No, I'm not a writer. And then I wrote a book. And even then I was like, well, it's just adapted from my lectures. And eventually I kind of started owning that I am a writer and that I write and create and communicate for a living. And it's really changed the way that I think. And, if anyone follows me on Facebook, they see that I write these long, thought out posts and I structure my thoughts in a certain way and I make arguments in a certain way. And that all comes from writing and from doing exactly what you said, acknowledging myself as a writer.
Good for you. Yeah. I think you laid it out perfectly. It's amazing how so many people can be writing every day and not make that claim. Whereas they might cook every night or love cookbooks and call themselves a cook. Or if they run, they call themselves a runner. But they're hesitant to say that they're a writer.
Right. I think that is pretty funny. I wanted to actually ask you, before we shift gears, are there any other kind of skills or habits that you feel make you more creative and or make you perform at a higher level in your work?
Yeah, I live a hectic life. I mean, my job is very demanding. I have 2 kids. I run a literary journal called 100 Word Story that we're coming out with a book next spring. And I'm a writer. And so it's really hard to carve out that time to write every day. And so I'm a big believer in routines and trying to write every day. And sometimes I wake up a couple hours before work, and that's great. I can write in those 2 hours. Sometimes I can't manage that. And so I call it a time hunt. I think time management's a big obstacle for a lot of people. And I find that I have to seize the nooks and crannies of the day. So I have to really be attuned to when I have a 5 or 10 minute time period that I can fill in a productive way. So for instance, instead of going on Facebook or Twitter, instead of binge watching a Netflix show, maybe I can claim that time and write 500 words or even 250 words. And, you can write 250 words in half an hour. Mm-hmm. And if you write 250 words a day for a year, I can't do the math off the top of my head. But, big things are built in increments. And so sometimes I think writers wait for those periods that are idyllic, to have 8 hours to write or 4 hours to write or a whole month to write. And most of us, life doesn't serve us idyllic time periods. And so we really have to strategize about how to use time in the best way possible. And especially once I had kids, I had to totally reconceive my writing life.
How do you manage to do it? I'm curious. I mean, do you write best in the morning? Do you write best in the evening? Or is it literally you write when you can?
Kind of all the above, but I'm best in the morning. And that's why I've been trying to structure my life more and more so I can get deep sleep at night. I usually need about 6 hours of sleep, which means that if I go to bed at 10, I can get up at 4 and I can have those 2 to 3 hours of pretty pure time before I have to get up and walk the dog and take the kids to school. But that said, going back to what I said earlier, sometimes I can't do that or I need to write more. And so it is about finding, maybe I can write 15 minutes during my lunch break. Maybe I can write 10 minutes after I put the kids to bed at night. I like this story of Toni Morrison. She wrote her first novel. She was a single working mom. I think she had 2 kids, and she wrote for 15 minutes every night before she went to bed. It was her worst time to write. She was completely exhausted. But that's how she built that novel, just through little pieces every day. And I think sometimes we forget the superhuman power of increment.
That's so interesting because in a sense, I agree with you. And I've told people, you can learn a language by using that 5 minutes of waiting for the bus to review flashcards instead of scrolling through Facebook. And at the same time, somehow for something like writing, everyone always talks about the flow state and that, you need hours of time on end. One of our best episodes with David Heinemeier Hansson was him kind of talking about how he has managed to get so much done and create so much. And he talked about, I block off 4 to 5, 6 hour chunks. And it's interesting to hear this different perspective that, yeah, that's great. But, who can get 6 hours at a time to work and write? For us mere mortals who don't have that kind of control over our time, you can still get a lot done in 15-minute increments.
I think so. I mean, I try to practice both, of course. And NaNoWriMo in November, certainly, that's when I write the rough drafts of every novel I work on. So it's great to get 50,000 words to start and kind of have that big chunk of time that I prioritize for a month. But I don't think you can do that every month, or most people can't, especially if they work jobs and have families. And so I really do think it's really think about how you spend time during your day and really think about what things you could give up in order to learn another language or spend that 5 minutes writing your story.
I think that's great. I think that's really great. And it's definitely a matter of, being pragmatic and understanding the limitations that you're operating under.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you this, Grant. You've helped a lot of people become writers. So I'm dying to know, who are your favorite writers? What are your favorite books? What are the books that have impacted your life?
Yeah, there's too many to list, definitely. And when the lightning bulb went off in my head to become a writer, I'd actually gone to France for a study abroad program, and I was deciding my major in college, whether to be an economics major or to be an English major. It was kind of an interesting decision. But I spent the whole semester there sitting around cafes and reading and writing. So the decision became pretty clear. And then I was reading a lot of American expatriate authors who lived in France, such as Fitzgerald and Hemingway. So I was swept up in their fiction. I'm just going to list a few other novels just because I love them so much. Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, I think it's one of the 5 best novels in the history of the world, but it's underappreciated. The same goes for Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles. Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son is just this amazing lyrical collection of short stories. It's almost like an extended prose poem. The same goes for Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. It's just an amazingly poetic and beautiful book. And more recently, Open City by Teju Coles, which is very meditative. And he does something that's very interesting. They always say, you need to put your characters in immediate, conflict and action. And that works on a lot of respects. But his character in the novel is really just meandering through New York City. So it's a very, one of the rules of writing is don't have your characters just walk around. But he has his characters just walk around, and it's a really interesting experience, so he did it.
Interesting. Okay. So I have to admit, I don't read a lot of fiction, but I hope to check some of those out. But I'd also wonder, what would you say to someone who maybe isn't a huge fan of fiction, spends a lot of time reading nonfiction, kind of sell them on the idea of why they should read fiction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think fiction, you're walking or you're living with another person. When I was saying earlier that writing teaches empathy and tolerance and understanding the people around you better and understanding yourself, it's in partly that because you're seeing through another person's eyes and you're living with them through their conflicts and their joys. And so I think that's one great benefit. I also think that the way that the fiction works in terms of the way the language is used, it can be a domestic drama, for instance. So it might make you more attuned to your neighborhood, your own house, the way that the author writes about these things. It can help you be attuned to the way people use language in their speech and dialogue. It can make you attuned to the very nature of conflicts between characters and how they resolve them or how they fail. So I think fiction, it is about the world we live in, whether it's science fiction or literary realist fiction. Every novel or story opens up a completely different world. And I think the ones that are most successful are the ones that we can see ourselves in and learn from. So it's a different type of learning. It might be less of a kind of school type of learning. It's a little bit more mysterious and mystical and emotional, but I think it's very important.
I like that. I think that's really, really interesting. And, I think there's a lot of value to be had there. I've never been able to convince myself, I think, is the problem. Or it's always that I've had a priority higher, this great new nonfiction book that's going to change the way I do business or something like that.
Right. I completely understand. Maybe you just have to find the right novel.
Maybe. I'm going to go through that list.
Yeah. And give yourself a challenge. Maybe it's just like mixing it up a little bit. Because I read nonfiction too, and I really value it, of course. But I don't read as much nonfiction as fiction. But I do make sure that I put, 5 or 10 nonfiction books on my list every year.
I'm curious, how much do you read in general? How many books do you try to read a year?
I was just thinking about this morning because I'm disappointed how my reading levels have dropped over the years, and largely because of living a hectic life. I don't have the time to read as much as I used to, and I'm just more scattered also. I don't know what pace I read. I'm a little bit of a slow reader. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm constantly reading. I usually have 3, 4, 5 books going at the same time. Everything from a nonfiction book. For instance, I'm reading the book on, I forget the whole title, but it's on habits right now. And I'm reading a biography of Leonard Cohen. And I'm always reading a poetry book because I think, again, this is part of creativity. Poetry and fiction are oftentimes kind of 2 separate camps. But I think by reading poetry, my prose becomes much better. So I try to be very varied in my reading.
That sounds like a smart thing. It sounds like the right thing to be doing.
It's great. They say that, creativity is taking very discordant or different thoughts and somehow blending them together. And I oftentimes do think that happens in a strange light bulb moment. They say oftentimes the best thoughts happen while you're in the shower. So I do like kind of exposing myself to a lot of different things at once.
I like that. I mean, we call that in our courses brute force learning, where you want to try and learn from many different sources in many different ways and not go down kind of the straight and narrow path. I think that definitely can be applied in kind of a more macro sense and try to learn many things at once as well. I mean, learning is a muscle, and the more you learn, the more you can. So I think that's an interesting approach.
And I think going beyond books too, because when you're saying you have a hard time making time for fiction or prioritizing it, I think I do the same thing right now with going to like live music or going to an art museum, things that I love to do, but somehow they don't fit in. But every time, we just started doing this in my workplace, every month, we have a half day where people can do anything creativity wise that they want to. And so I spent a whole half day at a museum, and it was amazing the things I learned by, usually I go to a museum and it might just be for an hour or two, and it might be once or twice a year. So prioritizing these other kind of experiences, I think, helps creativity in general a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So Grant, I know we're coming up on time here. I want to give you an opportunity to tell people a little bit about how they can learn about the stuff you're doing, maybe join a November challenge, and just give you kind of the mic to get people involved in all the various causes you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. We have an exciting National Novel Writing Month that we're working hard to plan right now. It officially starts November 1, but you can sign up as of now, and it's free. We're a nonprofit. So just sign up on NaNoWriMo.org and enter your, it's kind of like a social media site. You set up a profile, you describe your novel, and then we send a lot of missives and resources and guidance from, renowned authors and things like that. And you can just learn about it by getting on the website. And then my book, Pep Talks for Writers, is coming out on October 3rd, and I think it's a great guide to being creative year-round. I mean, that's the premise. There are 52 essays in it, meant to be, you can read them at any time. You can dip in and out of the book, but I think the 52 number is meant to be let's be creative year-round. Let's think about this every week of the year and think about how you can be creative on or off the page. And then I guess if you want to follow me, I'm at Grant Faulkner on Twitter. My website is grantfaulkner.com. I'm also on Facebook under Grant Faulkner. And then I guess my other venture is 100-Word Story. And that's an entirely different thing, but every story has to be exactly 100 words. And I actually have a book published called Fissures that is a collection of 100-word stories. But it's 100wordstory.org, and you can go there to find out more about that.
Awesome. So we'll put all the links to all that various stuff in the podcast episode if people want to check it out at superhuman.blog. And I want to ask you one more question, Grant, before I thank you for your time and we part ways, which is, if people are able really to remember only one big takeaway from this message and carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that one to be?
I think it'd be that you have a story and that your story is a gift. So tell it, and think about it as a gift, not as a product, but it's a gift. So take care of it and nourish it and prioritize your creativity because you're a creator. Think about that every day, about how you can be creative in all aspects of your life.
I love it. And a great message to end on. Grant, I really appreciated our chat today. I know our audience did as well. And I want to thank you for making the time and coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
All right, my friend. Let's keep in touch.
Okay. I would like to too.
See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperHuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.